We have 20 minutes for discussion, for question and answers. I don't know, is there a walk-around microphone, or do we have the people asking questions line up on the sides? Okay, so if you want to ask a question, just take position behind one of the microphones that are on both outsides here. In the meantime, while you are thinking about your questions and walking to the microphones, I may just start to ask Mike one question, again coming back to the harmonization versus convergence, which I think is a term where we practitioners, I think we need a little more guidance as to how to read it. And my question is what does it mean for the project? If I manage a harmonization project versus a convergence project, is this a difference, and what is the difference? And then from the perspective of the industry that later then interacts with these regulators, would they see a different outcome, and how? I don't know whether this is a clear question. If not, then let me know.
Thanks, Andreas. I think I understand the question. And I would say that harmonization is still a very valuable term. And as Carolyn was mentioning, if you're looking at standards, and again, ICH is the best example of that, it's an appropriate term, that you're developing together the same standard, essentially. We are seeing that going beyond technical requirements and standards into processes in various regions of the world. For example, the Gulf Cooperative Council, when they're looking at a joint drug registration and procurement process where they have standardized procedures. But generally, we've been talking about this in terms of technical standards. But if we're looking at convergence, really it's taking into consideration a broader outlook. You have standards that are the basis for a lot of regulatory cooperation, but then how do the regulatory authorities actually use those tools to cooperate? And what are some of the things beyond standards that aren't necessarily the same, such as good review practices, that are amenable still to regulatory convergence? Again, taking good review practices, saying having standard templates, SOPs, competency-based training, etc. These are all elements of a good review program that cross-cut product lines. To say that they're standardized is not the appropriate term. To say that they're harmonized is not the appropriate term. We're talking about convergence to make sure that agencies at least adopt the essential elements. How they express them in a regulatory framework could be different. If we look at Europe, for example, we have a harmonized process, a centralized process. You have a rapporteur and a co-rapporteur agency. Are their processes internally exactly the same? No, they aren't. So I think harmonization is a very useful term, but it has its limits. Furthermore, I would say that regulatory convergence takes into consideration the disparate capabilities of a lot of regulatory authorities and moving towards a future point. So as I'll be mentioning after the break, under APEC, we've set a target of 2020 for regulatory convergence for medical products. Does this mean that, for example, Vietnam and the US will be at the same point at the year 2020? No, but we're moving forward and we're making best efforts. So I think it's a more holistic term. It's a dynamic process, which harmonization is as well. Harmonization is a process, convergence is a process, but I think that we are seeing now a shift to this term for a variety of good reasons. At the ICTRA conference, we saw that term. Within PANDRA, we're hearing this term. It's now gaining a lot of traction, and of course, we've defined it in APEC and now in other fora. So again, I think it is more holistic, but harmonization is actually part of regulatory convergence.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. So I think we have two gentlemen here asking questions, and then maybe if you can, Lambert, and so just line up behind the microphones. So I don't know who was first. Yeah, so please.
Thank you. Toshito Minaga, Osaka City University. First comment, about the harmonization of convergence, it is self-evident that the requirement of the data, what data to submit, the harmonization of the data submitted is one thing, and the regulatory decision to approve or not approve based on the same data is quite another. And some, mutual recognition of GMP inspection was cited as an example by Mike. But even after the joint inspection, GMP inspection, the result or the decision, compliance or non-compliance, might be different. Therefore, what is being harmonized and what is aimed at should be clarified. This is a comment. The second comment is Ms. Compton. First, I would like to thank you for mentioning PMDA and Japanese authority quite frequently. Japan is being forgotten nowadays. Well, anyway. As to the standard, I understand that your standard is more like technical requirements, like tools to be used. That's more like technical guidance like stuff. But you mentioned the processes in each respective authorities, including PMDA. The steps are different, that sort of stuff. That's not the technical requirement, but the processes as the second level, which Mike mentioned. And well, my question is there going to be a standard to standardize that the process, regulatory processes, like for the certification of tools, the government has to have only 2 steps or 1 steps. That's a bit of a jump from the usual standard. That's my question. Anyway, thank you for mentioning Japan. Thank you.
So I think we take these 4 questions and then we go around. Is this okay?
I just do want to say that there is movement afoot to harmonize these qualification processes. Okay. These are qualifications for drug development tools and are not, it's a separate review and analysis process from the review and analysis product for product approval, market approval. So those are 2 separate types of activities, even though they may be the same sets of reviewers that are performing both activities. And there's a bit of a different focus of the different regulators on different aspects of the drug development tool or standard that they're reviewing. So the FDA is now at least in active conversation with the EMA in terms of harmonizing, thank you, Mike, their qualification processes. So I do believe it's possible, and they are working on it now.
Okay, so let's take a question over here, and please don't forget to introduce yourself for the people who listen on the web.
Thank you very much. David Wood from the World Health Organization. It's a question to Mike. I was very struck by the emphasis that you put on the implementation phase of standardization. And I think the message that you were giving is that a lot of effort is put into the development process and trying to achieve harmonization in the development process. And then you said, well, okay, once we get a harmonized standard, we then go into the implementation phase, and that it seems to be sort of like, a national sort of decision, and there's less emphasis put on that implementation phase. And I wonder, is that a correct understanding? And if so, are there opportunities to converge around the implementation of a harmonized standard?
Thank you, David. Question over there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Chimwemwe Chamdimba from NEPAD, the New Partnership for Africa's Development. Actually, my question is more related to even harmonizing the implementation. Because if I can recall in one of your slides, Mike, you indicated that probably it's more to do with the standards and the technical requirements, and not necessarily to do with the legal requirements and the laws of a certain country, that we may not go up to that point. It may not be necessary in the meantime to go up to the point of harmonizing the legal requirements. And I think if I can recall in the processes when we were developing the African Harmonization Initiative in Africa, one of the issues that was raised was that, well, there can be those common standards. There can be the technical requirements can be common, but for us to go into implementation, we can do it at that common level in the regional economic communities. But for us to get into that actual implementation, it will require that there have to be certain legal requirements, legal standards that are set at the national level. So probably my question then is that how do we, where's the place of the legal requirements? Where's the place of the policy and legal requirements in the convergence, in the implementation of harmonized standards and requirements? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Lembit, last question, and then we go back to the panel.
Thank you, Lembit Rago from WHO. I'm just listening all this, and I have been listening these talks a lot and know all the players. Now, there is one little thing that we would like to maybe give a bit of thought, is that we are talking about harmonizing more and more technical standards. We are talking about the regulatory convergence. We are talking about the regulators cooperating. We are talking about globalizing research and development, creating global products. So all comes together. But then there is one little thing. The new products are increasingly sophisticated. And they likely would demand also increasingly sophisticated healthcare setting to be properly implemented and used in, and increasingly educated healthcare provider to be able to use these new sophisticated products. And that brings me to another question, is that how is the convergence of health systems? What are the health systems playing the role in this regulatory decision-making, convergence, harmonization? Because the health systems and medical practices, as per today, are probably far lacking behind in any harmonization, alignment. And I'll take from my own practice 20 years ago or more, when I looked a bit something very pragmatic, average prescribed real-life dose in different countries for the same drug. Actually, in US, it was twice a bit average prescribed dose what was in some European countries, twice a difference. Of course, safety reasoning after that, if you know the average prescribed dose is twice as high in one market than in another, safety context and everything is completely different ballgame. So how we spin these differences, and also it's linked to the health technology assessments, how this is taking the healthcare systems development, medical practice into consideration, filling it into this ambition to have a global product. Thank you.
Thank you, Lembit. So I think most of the questions were targeting more towards Mike, but so maybe you start, and then I ask Carolyn to chip in on your thoughts. So we start with the acceptance. Data versus the decision might differ, although the data are accepted the same way.
Right.
So,
Okay, first of all, thank you. Excellent questions. Starting with different decisions, of course, yes. You can have, as we've heard this morning a number of times, same information. It's assessed, but you come to different decisions for a lot of good reasons, maybe sometimes not such good reasons. On the specifics of, for example, mutual recognition agreement and inspection, there, in fact, nothing is actually being harmonized. That is a different scenario than harmonization, where if I look at the MRA that we have, Canada with the EU, we say after, you have to start from pretty comparable systems. You assess those systems, like pharmacopoeial harmonization, you say that it should give the same end result. That's the equivalence and assessment. You sign a mutual recognition agreement between governments, and then you say, okay, there's a site in France that is now exporting to Canada. The French agency has inspected it. We are satisfied with that result because we know that if we had done the same thing, it would have been the same result. So in fact, we're not doing it twice. We're saying we have confidence in you. I think that's very important, but it requires a lot of work up front. David's question about implementation, tremendously important. What is the value of expending all the resources on a harmonized guidance or technical standard if they're not implemented or not implemented the same way? Now, there could be differences that are, I think, justifiable, but I would say that for some ICH products, the amount of effort to properly implement could be equal or greater than the development of the guidance itself. And time and again, if we look across regions, it isn't so much agreeing to a standard or a guideline, it's implementing it consistently and effectively, and perhaps the regulators don't have even the tools to be able to do that. I know it's a struggle for us to implement all the ICH guidelines. If we look at PSURs before the PBERs, we can say that were we going to assess every single product? No, we didn't have the resources, so we had to take a risk-based approach. How deep do you go into the review of this? Do you ask for Canadian-specific information as an addendum? All of these things can play into the implementation and mean that you're not really in harmony. So I would agree that implementation increasingly is an issue, and it could be dealt with effectively, for example, in the ICH regulators forum or other forums such as APEC, where regulators speak and speak with industry as well. The question about laws, also very important. What I would say is in some cases, obviously, where you have a political and economic directive, such as in the EU to create a single market, or ASEAN, or other regions, then you've got a solid footing and you can go further. I think where laws are an impediment to harmonization and convergence, they have to be dealt with. And perhaps some of that we've heard this morning in terms of multi-regional clinical trials, where it doesn't stand the science test, perhaps. But I would say at the same time that if we had to wait for laws to be harmonized, nothing would happen. And laws give you authorities. Regulations, for example, drug approvals say you have to show evidence of the following. It's the technical guidelines that they are the translation of those legal requirements into how to go about this, an acceptable approach that has flexibility inherent in it. So I think having the guidances being the focus is very important. But coming back to, there was really another sense to that question, and that is the political sense. And I think that we can underestimate times how important it is to have a political commitment in the form of laws and regulations working together with other countries in a region. And in terms of new products and sophistication, I don't know, Carolyn, did you want to talk about that, the healthcare systems? Thank you always for a very interesting comment and observation, Lambert. Harmonization of healthcare systems. I would just say we have enough problem trying to harmonize or converge as regulators. Healthcare systems are, yes, I'm sure lagging behind. HTAs and the interface with national regulatory authorities. That I think it's a very good point. I wouldn't know how to really respond to that question. Maybe you could answer your own question, Lambert. I don't know, but it's a challenging one, to be sure.
Okay, Carolyn, please chip in.
Well, having practiced most of my life in one of those healthcare systems, I can say that it is a challenge to even be able to collect the data to see how differently people are practicing medicine from one center or one system to another. We are struggling to do that right now. We are struggling to put together in the medical world the standards of care that are consensus-driven and evidence-based. And this is driven mostly by the professional organizations. It's not regulated in the same sense that the drug market is regulated. And in fact, the FDA will approve a drug for a certain population of individuals at a certain dose with a certain context of use, symptomatology, et cetera, but they don't enforce the use according to their label. Once it's out on the market, the physicians are free to use that product according to their own professional dictates. So there's a lot of heterogeneity in this world of care delivery that is outside of the domain, officially, the domain of the regulators, at least in the United States. And I'm sure that this problem is compounded globally in ways that make it almost seemingly at this point impossible to go into the healthcare system to achieve harmonization. We at least have to know where we're not harmonized and start there, and we're just starting to collect that data.
Thank you. We have two more questions. I think that's the last round before the break. So we take these two questions and then short answers, and we...
So there's some great examples of regulatory harmonization and convergence that you showed.
Can you introduce yourself just for the...
Mark Walensik from the Harvard Multi-Regional Clinical Trial Center. Some great examples. It's difficult to know, since we don't know really the denominator, if we're really on a pathway for harmonization or convergence overall, since each regulatory system continues to evolve on its own. Even in the United States, every 5 to 10 years, the Congress makes major amendments to the laws to address local gaps or needs that they perceive. And certainly when you go globally, it gets more complicated by several orders of magnitude. And so I'm wondering if some of the conversation or some of the resources should be directed not just to, okay, we're going to take 20 technical areas and come up with a harmonized or a converged standard in X number of years, and that'll be our indicia of success, that we've done it for breast cancer in this technical area, and that maybe some of the conversation or some of the resources should be increased to look at our metrics so that we're able to actually look within regions or across regions to be able to say we are on a pathway of convergence or not, and to make that data transparent, especially the implementation data, to have that mapped so it's easily accessible, whether it's the cost data, whether it's the time, the cycle data, whether it's the number of steps, whether it's for a clinical trial application or a drug dossier, whether it's the actual requirements for those dossiers, and have metrics that we could track over time and to see if those are becoming more converged, more harmonized, more simple, or if actually certain things are being converged and harmonized, but overall the denominator is actually getting more disparate. And that way we would have a predefined set of metrics that we could look at and see if we're really going in the direction that the examples can be used to argue that we are making progress. Because I'm not personally convinced how much progress is being made, although there certainly are great examples of areas where there's huge progress.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. My name's Tim Franson from Faegre BD Consulting and U.S. Pharmacopoeia. Very interesting discussions, and what I think we heard were talk about standardization at 3 levels, at data standards, then at disease standards, what's significant, and then at decision standards. Could the speakers talk about the interrelationship of those things and how that may contribute to more holistic approaches to harmonization?
Thanks very much. So short answers, please. And Carolyn, maybe you start with metrics and the interrelations.
Maybe I could start with the metrics. Measuring the process improvement in one process, in one regulatory system in one country, may not be the same yardstick that you can use to measure process improvement in another. I think we would first have to start out by defining the ruler by which we're going to measure process improvement. But I do believe, to misquote Lord Kelvin, that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So I do believe that this is a necessary step to being able to judge our accomplishments in moving toward convergence or harmony, to be able to measure these things. But I would like to speak to the 3 levels and the interaction between them. And certainly in terms of being able to make a decision, and I apologize in speaking for the FDA and interpreting what they say about the process and some of the data I showed you. But if they can't understand the data, if they can't compile the data in a way that's comprehensible, that makes it analyzable, it can't improve the process of decision-making. It does just the opposite. And in order for them to have confidence in their decision-making, they need to have organized data so that they understand the basis of the data collection, and they need to understand the scientific basis on which that data was collected. So these things build on one another, and at the end of the day, strong scientific-based decision-making on the part of the FDA is what regulatory science is all about. It's giving the FDA the confidence and the scientific heft with which to make clear decisions based on standardized, high-quality data and standardized state-of-the-science methodologies on which to collect that data. So one without the other impedes the end result, which is process efficiency.
Thank you. Mike, last word.
Okay, thank you. Metrics hugely important, and this is something we've been struggling with when we look at the work we're undertaking within APEC. We're developing roadmaps and priority work areas such as multi-regional clinical trials, good review practices, pharmacovigilance, et cetera. And we're at the point right now where we're trying to say what are key performance indicators, something that's measurable, that's meaningful. That is really hard to do. It's like trying to define what is a quality review. And I know CRS, and Larry will be speaking a little bit later, but you can measure time, but how do you measure a quality report and assessment? So this is a struggle. This will continue to be a struggle, and I'd certainly welcome any suggestions on key performance indicators, but it is really important to know if you're making a difference, and if so, how much. In terms of data assessment and decisions, I'll just say a comment on decisions and harmonization work. Is it the right term? Not sure. Around decision-making and the activity that's ongoing and has been some time about benefit risk. And I think, you know, this really plays into the larger healthcare system. And one could see why, for very valid reasons, that decisions could be different in different jurisdictions, but can we start to converge in terms of the tools and the approaches and how we describe the benefit risk decision-making process? I think that work is coalescing, and I think I look forward to seeing where that leads.
Thank you very much. Thank you to my panelists. I think we got a very good start, kick-off, many threads that we now have to pursue further during the 2 days of the meeting. Can we let everybody go into the coffee break?
Yes, we'll have a break and we'll reconvene at 11. Tracy, did you have an announcement?
Yes, very quickly. Just logistically, if you have coats on chairs or other materials, we actually have some people standing in the back of the room. So we encourage you to put your coats. We have a coat room we can direct you to. More importantly, I think concurrently while this session was happening, the IOM just released a report countering the problem of falsified and substandard drugs. We actually have the report briefs and copies of the pre-publication for you right outside. You're welcome to help yourself. And the same group also shared with us a report you may have seen that we released earlier in 2012 on ensuring safe foods and medical products through stronger regulatory systems abroad. We also have those final reports outside for you, so please feel free to take them.
Thank you.